Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to Veterans in Conversation, brought to you by the Power Story. We are excited to be here today. We've got a great guest, and I'll say up front, this gentleman is a friend of mine. We're both retired Marines. We met at the basic school, which is a 6 month program that all officers go through as Marines to become provisional platoon commanders. You learn how to shoot all the weapons, how to call for fire, how to bring in a helicopter for evac, all the communications. It's pretty comprehensive. While you're there, it's not great, right? But years back, it's like, man, that's a good school. So then fast forward to 2004, and Paul and I met again. We didn't know, but we went to Command and Staff College up in Quantico, Marine Corps Command and Staff, and we were in the same conference group. So Paul is a stellar Marine. He's a good man, very smart guy. You'll see that as we go on. So I just want to open the floor here to Paul to say hi. This is Paul Cucinotta, everybody.
There we go. I gotta take my weapon off safe here if I'm going to talk.
That's
Scott,
right.
thanks for having me here. I'm actually humbled to be in this audience. I got to meet the folks that are here with us earlier, and I always wonder when I get invited to things like this, why me, right? A lot of us sometimes wonder. I'm not all that special, to be honest with you. And the most exceptional thing about me is that, like all of us here, we were created by the same God for some sort of good purpose, I think.
Amen.
And so we have that in common, at least from the beginning, and I'm glad we're able to talk about those things. I'm happy to be here. I think, Scott, I'll just start by kind of giving you a little bit of background on who I am, if that's okay with you. And
Yeah, well, yeah, but before we do that, real quick,
okay,
Paul, you mentioned folks that are on live. So, yes, this is done live. And for folks that are here live, once this is done, we're recording, we'll send it out. And it's going to post on YouTube, and then we're going to share it with other platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So this gets the widest dissemination. So, Paul, do you mind if I read your bio first, and
I
and
mean, you
then you
can if you
can,
like. It's up to you if
yeah,
you want to do that or not. But you're welcome to.
yeah, yeah. I'll read it because I think it's a humble bio, and that kind of talks to who you are. So let's do this. So Paul Cucinato is a retired Marine colonel who, after serving on active duty for almost 3 decades, followed his passion for service to the nonprofit space to help individuals thrive while strengthening communities and bridging the civilian service divide. This ultimately led him to founding ZeroMils with fellow Marine veteran and longtime friend Kevin Smeagol, where they are creating military thriving cultures and communities with their clients and partners in the places where they live, work, and serve. Paul and his wife Beth have 4 children and 3 grandchildren, which is awesome. I can't wait for that myself. And when not serving their community, can be found enjoying the beach on the Crystal Coast of North Carolina. So that is ends so well. So take it away, Paul.
Yeah, great. Yeah, there's one correction. That bio is just a teeny bit old. As of the 30th of last month, we have 4 grandchildren. My daughter had a little boy, her third child, just a couple of weeks ago. So that part of life is super exciting. And just like life itself, those are all gifts, right? We're given gifts from God, and they all belong to Him. So we're just, praise Him for the opportunity to have those gifts with us for some amount of time, to include these friendships. And Scott, we've known each other
Yeah.
now, shoot, 30 plus years. So it's pretty incredible that we're able to do these kinds of things together. So I'll
Absolutely.
elaborate on my bio a little bit, not to go into too much detail, but I think it's important because we're going to talk, I think, about transition later. I'm not even sure I like that word anymore because it seems to denote this idea that you have a starting point and an ending point, when in fact that's not been the case. So I'll start by reflecting on something that a former Marine Corps commandant said, and he talked about life of service as a Marine as a transformative process. And the transformation is forever. And what he was talking about was getting these young men and women of character. The recruiters find them in their communities. They recruit them into the Marine Corps. We make them Marines. They serve for a set amount of time. 4 years or 40 years, and then they transform again out as veterans into civilian life, and they continue that transformative process. My life has been that way, particularly with the Marine Corps. So up until even just a few years ago, I would always identify myself as a Marine first. It was just part of who I became and who I think I am to some degree. But now I don't do that anymore. I identify myself first as a child of God, and then a husband and a father, and now a grandfather. And Marine is in there too, but it's not the priority anymore, and it probably never should have been. I tell you that from the beginning because I always knew I wanted to be a Marine, at least as far back as I can remember. And I have physical evidence of that. In my mom's house, she has letters, there's a couple of them actually, from Marine Corps recruiters. Unnamed captain has signed these letters, and it says something like this: Dear Mr. Cucinotta, we appreciate your interest in the Marine Corps. However, since you are only 7, we recommend you stay in school and go see your recruiter when you turn 17. And I've got 3 or 4 of those, like one from 7, one from 11. And what was happening, and if you remember back in the 70s, the Marine Corps would advertise in magazines, those little perforated postcards, right? Fill them out if you're interested. And boy, I was filling those out by the dozens every time I could. And my parents finally said, "Stop doing that." But I did it because they would send those letters. I love that. I knew I wanted to be a Marine, but they would also send me these iron-on patches of the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. My mom would iron them on my white t-shirts. I thought that was really cool as a kid growing up. But I say that because I always knew I wanted to be a Marine. I never knew how long I would stay in the Marine Corps, but that path was set before me from the beginning. And some of it was because of my dad, who served, but only for a short amount of time. Then I have a grandfather who served in World War II in the Navy. I have an uncle who served a career in the Coast Guard. So life of service has always been part of our family. So I kind of just knew I would go that direction. Anyway, I was
Hey,
born in
Paul,
Jersey.
if I
Yeah.
could, let
Yeah.
me hop in here real quick because when you mentioned the 70s, it hit me like a ton of bricks that I didn't introduce Barry up front.
Oh,
Barry is this so kind and patient. And he didn't throw a brick at me. But yeah, just so you guys know, Barry is here. He wasn't here last month. He had something pop up, but he's my co-host, so he's here today, and he's going to hop in, whenever he's wanting to do so. But then when we get, as we talked about, pregame, when we get to the challenges part, when we bring up that triangle that we'll speak to, he's going to run with it there. But he's going to hop in, as he feels comfortable doing during this interview here. So, okay, sorry about that. Go
no,
ahead.
no problem. So my transformation into service started very, very young, but I had great examples too. My mom was a nurse, right? So she was serving in her own capacity. We were very active in our Catholic church community. I saw my parents, leading by example, as servants in our community, whether it was, hosting an event or welcoming new people or teaching the youth in the faith or those kinds of things. I kind of saw that on a day-to-day basis. So it was very natural for me to want to join the military and want to serve. Although I still really didn't know what that was, right? We don't find those things out maybe even until after service when you reflect back on it. Anyway, I joined the Marine Corps right out of college. So in the early 90s, um, went through training that Scott talked about when he introduced me, and then was kind of set on this path. I got married about that same time too. So I'd been in the Marine Corps about 8 months, had known my wife really since we were young. We went to the same church, same community growing up, started dating really at the end of high school, went to prom together, and then dated through college and got married after I graduated from the basic school. So she's been down this whole path with me the entire time. I think we're coming up on 33 years of marriage here shortly. So it's a very part, she's a very big part of who I am too, um, and who our family is. And she's served in many ways in much more challenging environments than I have, right? Raising a family on her own for quite some time. She's a cancer survivor, so working through those challenges too during service was tough on us as a family. Anyway, I served for 27. You jumping in, Scott? I saw a little look on your face.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're used to that look, right? No, of course, my my mic was muted, of course. But no, what I wanted to, you brought up about your wife, and so many times spouses, don't get talked about. And a lot of times we forget as, husbands or wives who serve, how much our spouses are doing. But sometimes you don't see it in real time, and you reflect back on it, and it's like, holy smokes, how did you get through that, right? I was blessed that my wife, I never worried about her and my daughters. I missed them, but never worried about them. She's a very capable person. But yeah, oftentimes spouses, don't get, it's not limelight, I guess, recognition for serving alongside their members. So yeah, that's important. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's almost like this level of appreciation, certainly the gratitude side of appreciation, but also the understanding and the empathy side of appreciation, like what they're going through, the challenges. I even think about we talked earlier about being so busy. I think about at one point, my wife was raising four kids largely on her own, teaching school full time, and getting a master's degree. And she and I will even talk about that at times and say, how did you even do that? Like how there's not 25, 26, 28 hours in a day, right? But I think as we learn as Marines, as an example, and you go through different training environments and you train so much that it's not a reaction, but it's a trained response to some sort of stimuli, right? Well, I think our spouses do the same thing. They train so much because of um, we're gone, we're training, we're deploying, those kinds of things that they have that trained response and they can manage that chaos right there at home. So pretty incredible. And a big part of my service too, I won't go into like my individual assignments. I think that's largely kind of a waste of time. I'm no special. There's what 16 to 18 million veterans in the country today, all who have incredible service experience. So mine's no better, no worse, no different than theirs. But I'll highlight a couple of things. One, like I said before, I never thought I would stay in for a significant amount of time. I always knew I wanted to become a Marine and to do some service. But at one point in my career, I convinced my wife, let's do one more assignment. Early on, I'd been in about maybe 8 years or so, and said, let's go do one more assignment. And we came down to Camp Lejeune, not far from where I live today. And during the course of our move, our permanent change of station move, she was diagnosed with a pretty rare form of ovarian cancer. We were still living in the BOQ, hadn't moved into a house yet. We had three children at the time. They were all little, but one was not even a year old. And so a very traumatic time for her, for me too. But I think looking back on it, I wasn't sensible enough to even recognize the risk, to be honest with you. I just thought, oh, here we go. Another challenge we'll overcome. But she persevered through it. But the way our community, I'll say it like that because it wasn't just Marines and sailors and even the civilians that lived out with us out in Jacksonville, North Carolina, the way the community responded in their level of service, whether it was friends helping us with the kids, uh, a Marine major who was more senior than me, knew me but not very well, had a home for sale in Jacksonville. He had PCS somewhere else. He heard about my situation and offered the house to us to rent, and he just took it off the market. Like, who does that, right? Another guy comes to my front yard one time, knocks on my door, and says, "Hey, I'm going to be in your backyard mowing your grass." I'm like, "Well, first of all, who are you?" And no, I don't need you mowing my grass. He was a Navy doctor who had heard about us, not in my chain of command. And he said, "Hey, listen, I'm not asking you. I'm just telling you that's what I'm going to be doing. Don't call the cops." Like they came out of the woodwork, right? And this is all pre 9/11, so we're not at war, but there was this level of service. All these folks that I identified had rogered up, right? Raised their right hand to serve this nation. And in doing so, intuitively, they decided to serve those around them, right? Nobody assigned them these duties. Nobody said you had to do these things, but they did it. So by that time, this is maybe 2000 time frame. And that made us start to think, well, we're going to hang around for a while because service begets service. We thought, okay, now we have to pay it back or pay it forward as we go down the line. And then 9/11 happened, right? So that kind of sealed the deal for most of us who were on active duty at that time. So we were At that point,
That's
we were
right.
in for the long haul, right? So that's a highlight of my service, and it's interesting because we learned a lot about it. We learned how to suffer, right? Suffering is kind of a part of life. And I think sometimes it's even a gift that's hard to accept if you've suffered for a while, and it takes a while to accept the fact that it is a gift. Maybe not even a good gift, but it's a gift because it's something that we have to receive, right? To take a gift, you have to receive it. We had to receive this gift and use it for good. Use it in a way that would honor God, would honor our families, would honor our friends, our community, etc. So that kind of
Yeah,
sealed the
Paul.
deal for us to serve.
Yeah, yeah. That it's a. I'm froze up here. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Yes, thank you. It's a fruit of the spirit, right? Long suffering. It's part of all that, and yeah, we do learn so much through suffering because what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And that's it's interesting that you brought that up. We have another group that meets on Wednesdays. It's a Bible study, right? And um, there's a lot of folks now that are going through some hard times, and that's an important thing to know and to understand that we can, the word that thrive that you guys use a lot, that we on the other side of that surviving is the thriving, right? But we learn it through that suffering. It makes us better folks. Um, the stories that you shared there, I think, are amazing to the heart of people, right? The major that was like, dude, rent my house. The doctor that's, I'm not asking you, I'm doing it, but just don't shoot me or call the cops, right? The goodness that comes with that, God puts that on people's hearts, I believe, right?
Sure,
And sometimes we have to let people do things for us. I mean, as a Marine, how often are you, that's just not how you're wired. Dude, I got it. Sometimes it's nice to step back and let people do things and let people care for you because that's what's on their heart. So accepting that, and I think you learned that. I had it took me a while to learn that for sure.
sure. And
Yeah.
it's the old saying, it's better to give than to receive. I think that's so true because it's easier to give, right? It's hard to receive because sometimes the things we're given we don't want,
True.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's some growth that goes in there too. And suffering is one of those growth aspects. And listen, I can speak it better than I can live it. Like I've been through some suffering before that I've failed at. I've failed to see um, the fruit of that suffering, but now I do. If I reflect on it years and years later, but when you're going through it, phew, it's really really tough, right? But you have to kind of figure out how not to fall into despair, and I think it's the people around you and your faith that'll keep you there. So the rest of my service, not to get too crazy, I spent a lot of time in operational commands. So, deploy time, preparing for deployments, recovering from deployments. I spent some time at school. I was pretty fortunate, not just our training that Scott talked about, going through the basic school or even career level school, but I had a chance to get a master's degree. In finance, I had a chance to go back to the War College later on in my career and get another master's degree. So those are blessings for sure, especially when you're, spending a year out of the operating forces and you get to go to school for that year. Incredible. There is some payback for those assignments, and my payback, and one of the few times that I was out of the operating forces, I spent in the Pentagon, and 3 years in the Pentagon is measured in dog years, right? So it feels like 21 years, right? Multiply by seven. But I bring that particular assignment up because that was challenging, in many ways more challenging even for my family than deployments. One of my wife's favorite lines that she used back then was, it was easier when you were deployed because I knew I couldn't count on you, right? There's this false sense that, oh, he's home. He can pick the kids up from soccer practice. He can help my daughter, our daughter with homework, right? And I quickly realized that wasn't happening for us, largely my fault, like priorities, right? And I kind of had the priorities flip-flop the other direction. I'll maybe I'll end with this as we transition because again, nobody wants to hear about my service, but I will end with General Krulak again, who I talked about, transformation versus transition. Um, when he was probably a brand new general officer, I was just a lieutenant. And Scott, this may have been at the basic school. I can't remember exactly where it was, but
It was. I know where you're going with this.
he
Yeah.
was a pious man and a Christian, is a Christian. And he said, you have to get your priorities right. And the priorities for him, and that he told us, were faith first, then your family, then the Marine Corps. And boy, I wrote that down. I remembered it. I loved it. I used to tell Marines that all the time, but I never lived it. I never lived it. I try to live it now. I still struggle. But when I was on active duty, the Marine Corps came first. My family came second. My faith was in there somewhere. We were going to church every Sunday. I was raising my kids in the faith, but my priority was the Marine Corps. And I think maybe the Marine Corps wants it that way. Maybe I wanted it that way, right? And so, you know, in that same light, service, we often use that in line with the word selfless service. But if I'm honest, some of my service was very selfish. Not that I was trying to do something great. I was really trying to serve. I loved my Marines. I loved being with them. I loved serving, but it was about me a little bit too, right? And when you reflect on that, that's a hard reflection to look back and say I was this great selfless servant. Well, you may have I may have appeared that way, but some of my service was very selfish too. It was selfish of me. I mean, God gave me all these gifts. He gave me this opportunity to serve. He gave me this family, but I wouldn't put him first and accept that, or the family he gave me second. Instead, I put my career first, right? So I think that's a hard thing to reflect on too, but there's value in it as we move forward.
Yeah, yeah, there's absolute value. Those are some big time nuggets there, Paul. And I think if you talk to other people who serve, especially folks that spend a career in, right, 20 plus years, that's a very familiar refrain. I one of the reasons I retired as a lieutenant colonel was because the next stop was going to be up at the Pentagon, joint tour there, and nobody wanted to go to Northern Virginia. They wanted to be in Southern California. I had 20 years and 4 months at the time. So long story short, it was time to cash in my chips because I could. So, when you made the comment about, I don't know where you saw all the bricks falling on my head, but when you made the comment about at some point when you're not operational and you're, back in garrison, um, where there's supposed to be time, right? Because you're away, then that's good. But when you're here, I expect that you're part of the family, that you're doing things. And man, that is so true. I found myself tripping over that so much, and that's the one regret that I have in my service is I felt that I did a good job, but looking back, there's times where I could have stepped up instead of saying, I'm beat. I mean, I was, but if I'm willing to suck it up for the Marine Corps like I did, I certainly should be able to do that for my wife and kids, right? I got better, as I got older, but there were plenty of times where that was an issue. And I mean, I'm blessed that I was able to have a career just like you talked about. But yeah, there's a lot of lessons learned there, and that's one of the good things about us having this conversation, right? Maybe younger folks will hear this and think, yeah, those guys are old, but you know what? They still look halfway decent. So maybe there's some goodness to what they're saying, right? There,
And
but
I think it's
any,
generational. It might be generational too, Scott. And
yeah.
or maybe our kids do learn. My son is a Marine Corps captain right now on active duty, and he has a young family. He and his wife, and they have a little boy, Theo, who's a year and a half or thereabouts. And he is making his family a priority, but he's also an exceptional Marine, right? He's finding that um, people use the word balance, which is ridiculous. There's no such thing as work-life balance, in my opinion. I actually met a mentor of mine last week, a guy named Lieutenant General John Whistler, retired, and we were talking about this very thing. And he said it's not a balance; it's harmony. It's finding harmony. And I love analogies so much so that my business partner always calls them Cooch analogies after my last name. And most of them are pretty silly. Maybe this one is too. But when you think of a harmony in the orchestra as an example, not every instrument or every member of the orchestra gets equal playing time. Not even close, right? But it sounds beautiful because they put the right pieces in the right places. And I think if we do that with our lives, if we can create harmony with our lives, it may not be the exact time, 50-50 between career and family, if those are the two things you're trying to balance. But if you do it right and you create this harmony, it can be beautiful, right?
Absolutely. And talking about harmony, that's a good segue because I do want to bring Barry into the conversation here because I see he's taking notes, so I'm sure he's got things
Uh-oh.
he wants to talk about there. But so at this point, what I do want to do, looking at the clock here, is I want to go into the transition piece, right? You transitioning from service, and I agree. You mentioned that transition. Transition is continuous, right? There is no end. And you can have multiple transitions stacked, right? You could be leaving the Marine Corps or service, and your kids are leaving to go off to college in that same time. Or, maybe you and your spouse are having problems and you guys get a divorce and your kids are leaving. I mean, so there's a lot of layers to transition. And if we're not ready for those things, they can cause us to possibly go into a tailspin. So with that, let's take a quick second and hop over to Barry and see what he's got to say. What's up, Barry? You're muted.
Yeah, Paul, the one thing I really enjoyed was when you said that you had an issue with the word transitioning, and you're right. But that issue is going to be determined by how we see that word. And for me, if we all we see is leaving and arriving, then we've created an illusion and a mythology that simply doesn't exist, and it's simply going to set people up for failure. I think the gift of every transitioning, it's the place between where we really have to face the fires of adversity and challenge. It is not an easy process, and I don't think it should be an easy process. It's a bit like saying giving birth should be a simple, smooth process and you smile through the whole thing. It's not. In the gift of pain is the weight of the wisdom that we carry and the pleasures and the joys that come from it. Now, I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of your own experience of transitioning in that place between and what you faced that brought the wisdom, the healing, and the strength to move into the next transitioning. And, we transition continuously. I mean, I would say for now, my greatest operational area of transitioning is, and probably Rich as well, is I'm in my 70s and Rich is in his 80s. So now we're facing transitioning around life distance, aging, changes in body. So it's as Scott said, it's from when we're born to when we die. So what's been your journey of transitioning and how do you see that and map it out?
Yeah, and it's changing almost daily, right? Maybe not quite that often, but part of it is how we approach changes in our lives in terms of planning. So some people are much better planners than others. Um, and just recently, I started thinking about this concept and using it with my own kids, with my own life, aiming for something further out. Like, what do you want your legacy to be? And I'm not talking about necessarily JD Rockefeller type legacy or, but what do you want your legacy? What do you want to accomplish in this life that you have? You can't plan too far out because you have to live in the moment and nobody knows what tomorrow brings. So how do you find harmony there too as you're planning ahead? But for me, when I was getting ready to transition the first time, I wasn't thinking that far out. I was thinking about like what is next? What is next? And I think that's okay, but to what end though, right? And you have to be aiming for something, and whatever that something is. For me, as I've grown over time, it really is my faith, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I only want two things. I want to get my family to heaven, and I want to get myself to heaven, right? If I'm purely selfish, maybe my friends too, right? So, but how do you incorporate that into a transition? And then another thing happened to me too. I won't go into all the details, but General Krulak, I'll bring him up one more time, three times a charm, I suppose. In that same discussion, and the reason he said faith should come first, then your family, then the Marine Corps. In our case, as Marines, it could be your business, it could be your profession, could be your sport, whatever it might be, is because he said the Marine Corps will break your heart. The Marine Corps will break your heart. And we know God won't do that, right? And we hope our family won't. But it's a fact for most Marines that will happen. And that in his mind, like he joked about it. He said he was a one-star general at the time. He said, for some of you, it may be not getting promoted to captain. Again, we were lieutenants. He said, for some of us, it could be not becoming the commandant. He said that kind of tongue in cheek, which was funny because he did become the commandant later on. But at one point, you either have to leave the Marine Corps, something will happen significant that breaks your heart. And that happened to me, and my heart was broken at a time of my Marine Corps career. So when I transitioned out, at first I wanted to escape. I wanted to get so far away from it, like you do with any other kind of trauma, if you want to even use that word. If I can escape it, if I can hide from it, um, if I can put it in the past or tuck it way deep down inside, maybe I won't feel that pain. Maybe it won't be there anymore. So while I was trying to do that in my own right, try to start a small business or thinking about these other opportunities, a good friend of mine, Kevin Schmiegel, who I've known almost as long as Scott. Kevin and I met in the mid 90s. He invited me to come serve with him in a nonprofit. And at first, I was resistant for a variety of reasons. One was the job itself didn't sound, sexy enough for a retired Marine colonel, right? But it was also this idea that I wanted to escape the military and veteran community. Little did I know that was the best thing for me because I went to serve as the chief operating officer and then eventually the chief financial officer for this veteran serving nonprofit. We served veterans and military families and first responders. I learned a lot about how to run a business. That was fantastic. I was working with my best friend. That was fantastic. But I was serving with, for, and around, and in some cases being served by other servants, veterans, great volunteers who were just grateful Americans, first responders, et cetera, right? So I fell very smoothly into that transition part of my um, short part of my life. I did that for about 3 years, and then had some struggles there too, or created some struggles depending on how you look at it, and ended up moving on from there. But Barry, I think that kind of talks a little bit about the transition. So I was fortunate. I don't believe in luck. I think luck is a combination of opportunity and hard work and goodwill, right? Goodwill from those around you, and certainly blessings from God, right? That's what luck is about in my book. But I was blessed to go there with my friend. He was a support system for me, right? My heart was still broken. In some cases, it probably still is today, but certainly was back then. And he was there with me by my side, which was helpful. And if I had gone to any other job, I think I wouldn't have had that support structure, um, and that opportunity to serve again. I literally was serving. I was around the folks I care most about um, most of my day, right? And which was incredible.
Yeah, no, I think some really good points there. I mean, when Scott and I visualize the triangle, and we don't need to bring it on at this point, Scott, anyway, but the apex of the triangle, the top, is faith. On the left-hand side is well-being, and the right-hand side is family. Now, I think family or tribe, let's call it tribe. We can differentiate tribe in terms of our family and our service environment. Now, there's a tension between the two, which is what you've pointed out. The other thing I often point out is that we're very good at watching everyone else's back, but we're not too good about taking care of ourselves. And I often, when I talk to veterans and even in my own journey, it's getting to the point where I realized I had left myself behind, and my mission was now to go back. And in that journey of going back, my core mission was to identify the components that required healing, whether they were moral injuries, imposter syndrome, combat trauma, stress, whatever, but also to identify the strengths and bring them forward into the transitioning process. What was your experience like in the balance between family and service and the tension between the two? What was outside? Things like imposter syndrome are often outside of our arc of fire. We don't even know it exists. It's a haunting thing that kind of every now and then echoes to us. So what were those things that snuck in on you in your transitioning? And how did you manage the balance between or realignment between your tribes? And what did you do to maintain your well-being? What was your
Mm,
overall balance and journey forward
sure.
with that?
So, so I'll start by I love the tribe family concept. And if you look in different cultures, different times in human history, a family and a tribe, look a lot different, bigger, smaller, than it is today. For me, my tribe and my family were largely one and the same, um, but they weren't necessarily, genetically related to me, right? It wasn't like my blood relatives. In the very beginning, Marines become part of your family. For me, they did. I mean, I'll use the word love. I wish I could speak Greek because there's so many different ways to say love in Greek, right? So when I say I love Marines, it's not that romantic love, it's that brotherly love, right? Men and women, right? They were my brothers. Didn't matter what their gender was, and I loved my Marines and the good ones, the great ones, the bad ones. It didn't make a difference. I literally loved them as much as I love my family. But that created tension because in some cases they would become before my family. Like it was, Christmas Day, putting the uniform on, going to the barracks. Like, where are you going? You're leaving? Well, my Marines, they're alone. I want to go see them. And well, what about your kids? You didn't see them all week, but you just got home for, oh, I'll be right back, right? I mean, so that kind of tension existed then. And even when I transitioned, I went to work for this nonprofit called Operation Gratitude. And immediately I fell in love with my employees, right? The people that worked alongside me. Again, some more than others, but I felt a calling to them too, and this need to want to be around them, to serve them. Some of it was more selfless than it was in the past, but it's still selfish, right? Because I felt um, needed, right? I mean, when I think about meaningful employment, one thing we talk about when we create thriving cultures and communities for veterans. Meaningful employment is not just about having a great job or great career. It's about being inspired and inspiring others, right? This opportunity to have that inspiration, to share that inspiration. It's about providing value, knowing you're providing value and feeling valued, right? Really feeling part of a team, right? You get up to plate and you actually get a base hit, right? You feel part of that team. And then the third piece is serving in an environment where there's mutual trust and respect. That existed in the military for sure. And it did in this organization. So I felt compelled there too. So immediately the tension came back, Barry, right? I'd left one family, but then I inherited another, and quickly they filled the gap. So much so that my first year at Operation Gratitude, again, coming out of a military environment, lots of deployments, lots of time away from home, lots of time even away from home when I was home, working the Pentagon, right? I was literally 15 minutes up the road and I still stayed in my office overnight on more than one occasion. Well, my first year out of the Marine Corps, I spent more than 200 nights away from my home, traveling or with my team or whatever it might be, right? So fool me once, yeah, right. I'll be fooled 100 times, right? Oh, I won't do that again. I won't put that first, but I did. So I thought I was going to create some harmony, and then immediately the tension came right back again, right? And somewhere one of the instruments or maybe a handful of them were out of tune, right?
So when we're out of alignment, we know we're out of alignment when we feel that internal tension or that external tension. A lot of partners of veterans will often say when he's home, he's actually not home. He's muted, he's shut down, but yet I watch him when he gathers with his tribe and he's animated. And it's almost as if they say, I feel as if they've become his partner.
Yeah.
Now, I think that challenge, if you had to go back, what would you learn and what can people learn that there are the responsibilities of service, but tribe and being in family is not necessarily that you can be there 365 days a year, but it's about a quality of presence. It's a quality of knowing that, and this is also faith and service driven, is that service and faith are about being fully present with open hearts in any environment that we are in. So, what would you bring to the table in terms of your learning as you look back about how this can be done in a better way in terms of our presence to the families that we love, apart from our service to the organization that we're born into?
Yeah. I think some of it is, if you look back and you want to maybe teach yourself something, if I can go back 10 years ago and say, hey, listen, don't do what I did. Here's a good example, right? So I'll give you one example. So talked about my wife's cancer. And when she had cancer, she actually had to go in for these week-long in-hospital chemotherapy treatments. And again, this is pre 9/11, but I was a young Marine captain, battery commander, right? So I'm responsible for 150 Marines, and they're my Marines, and they can't do anything without me, right? So I was literally training with my Marines at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, right, for 30 days or something like that. And during that time, my wife was going to the hospital. Friends were coming up to help watch my kids. She was in the hospital going through this chemotherapy treatment. And in many ways, I was hailed as a hero for doing that. Like the Marine Corps saw that. At least some leaders in the Marine Corps said, "Hey, good job, Paul. Way to take one for the team." I wasn't taking one for the team. My wife was. I was doing what I loved, being where I wanted to be, right? So what would I do different in that case, Barry? I would go back and tell myself, "Hey, listen, what are you crazy? If your unit of 150 Marines can't um, continue the mission without you, something's wrong, right? Those guys and gals, they can execute. You're there to steer the ship, and maybe they'll miss a little something, but you can afford to be away." Um, and and I learned that lesson before I got out of service. I figured out what I did wrong, and I can tell that story now without necessarily getting emotional. I used to get emotional before, not because I let my wife down, which I did, but I almost it's shameful. I'm ashamed of that behavior, right? How was I that stupid to do those things? And again, it wasn't cut and dry back then. It wasn't cut and dry for my leaders for sure. I don't blame anybody for that. It was my fault, nobody else's. Nobody pressured me. That's what I chose to do. But I had opportunities later on in my career where something similar was happening to one of my Marines, and I didn't let them. I didn't let them go to the field. As almost the exact same case happened, and this Marine was like, "Oh, don't worry, sir. My wife and daughter will be fine." He had a daughter that was special needs and had to do some inpatient care. I said, "Listen, Scott, you're going." It wasn't this Scott; it was a different Scott. I said, "You're going to be with your family at the hospital. That's your appointed place of duty. You're not taking leave. You're just going to go." And well, he fought me on it, but I outranked him, and so that was that. And I made him go with his family, and he was angry at me for quite some time. About 10 years later, he called me and thanked me for that. It probably took him that long to realize, right? And he probably had another experience with maybe one of his Marines, right? So, I think that's the way, Barry, is you can't change what happened in the past, but what we can do is reflect on it and learn ourselves, right? Don't commit the same sins over and over again, although we do that too, but try not to at least, and certainly teach others if you can teach others about that. And respect, demonstrate that you respect what you value, right? Demonstrate what you respect and respect what you value, right? So the same example, when General Krulak told us faith, family, Marine Corps, well, then very few Marines lived that life, not the ones that I saw, right? They flipped it. And they were very faithful people, family oriented, but the Marine Corps came first. And maybe it has to at times. I get that. Like we're going to war. I'm not I'm not sugarcoating that kind of thing. But I will tell you, I had a Marine that worked for me that lived it right. A super faithful father and family man, a great Marine officer, um, but he put his family and his faith first all the time. But he never shirked his responsibility or his duties, right? But that hurt his career over time, right? Because, and even me, like I even told him, I gave him a fit rep one time and I said, hey, listen, I respect you more than most. You're a better father than I would ever hope to be. And I respect the fact that you're a Christian and you live this life. It's remarkable. But you fall here in my profile of Marines that I rate of this grade, right? Because the Marine Corps really values this. We value, a Saturday morning that you're at work when you kind of sort of maybe don't have to be, but if you're there, harumph, right? And so those little things, I didn't demonstrate what I even espouse. I would tell my Marines faith, family, core, but I would reward them to flip it, right? And I mean, you have to be honest about that, right? Again, it's a little bit shameful. Don't tell anybody I'm telling you this, right? But
Well, Paul,
yeah,
it's a
so
double-edged sword, Paul, right? Because if you're in the Marine Corps, you're probably, an alpha male or female. And then that's the culture as well. So they expect it and you're okay with it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like an enabling thing. And it's easy to get caught up into that. I think so many of us don't realize that until years down the road in service or once we've left service. It's like, man, why didn't I see that? Why was that not as clear then as it is now? And in life, a lot of times it's that way, right? When you have a little different perspective, a different vantage point to look at it. But it's what are you doing when? And you get caught up in that
But let
because
me
that's the
clarify
system.
too. I think you can. The best ones can do it. The best of us can find that harmony and be exceptional Marines or firefighters or cops or athletes, doctors and nurses, whatever it might be, whatever their life of service is about. They can be exceptional there and exceptional at home and exceptional with their faith. I just wasn't good enough, so I had to pick one, right? I just wasn't good enough to do all three perfectly. I have run into Marine officers and other folks in other professions that can do that, and I respect them so much, but us mere mortals just can't do that.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't
Well,
think I've
I
seen.
think it's
Carry on, Scott.
I was going to say,
I,
I think it's important to remember that it does come at a cost, right? And there is no balance. It's decisions that you make along the way, and those decisions are going to absolutely impact what comes next. And if you're balancing and trying to put those things in order, then okay, my priority is this, but the Marine Corps looks at that differently. And so, yeah, you may not get what you're aspiring to, whether it's a certain job or a promotion that comes with the next rank and then everything that comes with that, at least the potential, right? And so again, that's the double-edged sword piece, right? And are there some that can do all that? Yeah, but I mean that's those guys are almost walking on water, right?
Yeah.
well, I think that's
Yeah,
a
sorry,
core
Barry, go
point.
ahead, man.
I think that's the core point here is that I think there's a way. It's a marriage when you move into the military, and there are commitments and there are expectations, and perhaps we don't have to compromise aspects of our pathway in the military, but it's what we do in the place between ourselves and our families. Now, I call that the internal territory because we often come home and we know that our communication can be muted. We know that partners can feel very alone in the presence of their veteran. I know that veterans or people that are transitioning or people in service find it very difficult and sometimes painful to communicate the weight that they carry, whether it's the grief, especially in transitioning, loss of tribe, loss of self. And so the family can feel quite sidelined. Now, I think that that operational zone where you are now challenged to find ways to bridge between yourself and your family, and that ability to bridge means you need to reach into the most uncomfortable parts of yourself. As much as you face discomfort in becoming stronger, faster, and more proficient, there's the internal place where we now have to reach into. I eventually wrote in my first book, I wrote a letter on behalf of a veteran to his wife because they couldn't find the language. And it was creating this gap of isolation and discontent. And it was a letter that they could modify, hand over, ask them to read, and then bridge into conversation. How do we talk about our grief? How do we talk about the sense that we don't feel good enough? How do we talk about the sense that we feel shut down? We don't know how to feel properly anymore. Now, that is painful and that is a difficult challenge to face. But until we face that one, we get to the fact that in hindsight, we look back rather than maintaining that balance of faith, family, and tribe. And I think that small percentage that get it can actually be increased incrementally because it's simply about facing the discomfort of what we avoid, understanding and mapping the territory that lies between us and our families, and then starting to activate our, it's like getting your SOPs organized when you go into the family. I wonder what your thoughts are around that.
I think some of it comes down to Scott talked about the basic school, where you're learning all these things and it's exciting, but it's also kind of a challenge, right? And TBS is the three letters for the basic school, but we would create other language out of that. We would call it, thousands being stupid or the big suck, right? I use that last one because I think some of the challenges we face in life are going to be they're going to be struggles. They're going to be suffering. It's going to suck. But I think if we have to embrace it in some way, right? And it sounds it sounds easy to do if you're, running a marathon and your leg hurts and you're like, yeah, I'll just embrace the suck. That's easy to do compared to a moral injury or dealing with grief or or the loss of a loved one or loss of a Marine or sailor or soldier, right? So it's hard to embrace that um, in the same way, but I think we still have to embrace it. And what I mean by that is it, accept it, own it, and even if it's your own mistake, accept it and own it. And you can accept it and own it, knowing that you don't have to pay for it in the long term, right? I mean, Jesus forgives us. He suffered and died for our sins from at least from a religious standpoint, right? So somebody else is there to help us, right? Take on that burden in some ways. But if we hide the burden, if we pretend it doesn't exist, or we pretend it doesn't bother us, or we run from it, or we stuff it down deep inside, then we're not embracing it and then letting somebody else help us with that challenge. So again, when you embrace the suck, you never embrace it alone, right? Having been through things like the basic school or frankly much more challenging environments in my military career, there's always somebody there with you, somebody you can depend on. And I think when you embrace something, you accept it just like a gift, right? You have to receive it, but others around you can help ease the burden, right? But you have to be outward with it. So I think what happens with a lot of us, myself included, is you don't want to embrace it because you don't want to think about it. You don't want to accept it. You don't want to face it. So it's easier to turn your back on it. And when you do that, right? Just like any other bad situation, when you turn your back on it, when you remove your eyes from it, you can't sense what's happening behind you or what's happening inside of you. And then so what happens is it then embraces you, it takes over. And the more you try to hide from it or run from it, the more it will impact you. So what do you do? Barry, this is easier said than done, but you embrace it, right? It's called what some people would call struggling well. There's a book I think entitled that, but I prefer to say suffer well. Like suffer well. Like recognize that you may not know it, you may never understand why that suffering is put upon you until one day when your maker explains it to you, I guess. But embrace it, right? This suffering was given to me. I was chosen for this for a reason. I don't know why. I'm not gonna argue. I just embrace it. Again, that's easy for me to say. And at the time that I was suffering the most, I couldn't embrace it. I wasn't strong enough, or I just even couldn't recognize the value of embracing it. But what happened was eventually, starting with my wife, right? Matter of fact, I think she embraced it so much that it caused her to go through some suffering, right? Because she took it on. She literally took part of that burden, but so did some really dear friends of mine too. And then that kind of helped me work through it. And then, most importantly, right? We talked about the Bible, the good book. That's where I get my inspiration from, especially now, right? Going there, reading scripture, and recognizing that I'm not the only one. As a matter of fact, this is part of a much bigger plan than my simple, you know, you know, hopefully 100+ years, maybe if I'm lucky on this earth, right? But certainly several decades. Um, there's other folks that have done it. And matter of fact, there's one individual in particular, right? Christ, who's willing to take those burdens with us, right? Or take them on for us, right?
So I think, yeah,
Yeah, Paul,
spot on. And yeah, carry on, Scott, go
yeah,
for
go.
it.
No, go, Barry, go.
We could fight about this. Okay, anyway, yeah, look, I think the greatest challenge we have in service is facing our vulnerabilities. It is the most uncomfortable experience. My generation are actually vulnerability averse. We don't want to go near it. In fact, we don't even know how to go near it. It was always about suck it up and keep moving. I think facing our vulnerabilities You nailed it when you said we cannot do that alone. We need to ask for help, which is we need to reach out, which of course, if we are not comfortable with vulnerability, we don't want to reach out because the reaching out is a declaration of vulnerability. But it's in that tension is our healing. The second thing is that, if we look at faith, faith is that quality of presence inside us that is always with us. Now, if we wanted to create change, the challenge we would ask ourselves is, what part of myself do I leave behind for the few moments I'm at home while I'm away? And how do I do that? So it's that balance. If we understand faith, well, there's a part of us that we leave behind. And if we don't do it right, it's an empty space. So I think these are the huge challenges in transitioning that face all of us. We can break it into all the little things, but ultimately your challenge is embracing that vulnerability, reaching out, understanding how faith works, and looking at how when you are home, you bring the best of yourself in, even if it begins with a communication of, I'm just feeling a bit down, I'm struggling, I need help. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I think that exists in every family.
Yeah.
Even if I look back at my Marine Corps career, because you're right, nobody ever wants to admit weakness, right? Even when you can see somebody that's um, struggling physically, whether it's a wound or an injury, they still, no, I'll be fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. When you know they're not, right? But it takes a lot of courage to admit when you're feeling down or when you're weak. Nobody wants to show any sort of dent in their armor. That is challenging. We've changed that a little bit in the military institutionally, because we recognize the challenges with suicide, not just in our veteran community, but in our military community, and that's existed for quite some time, throughout my entirety of my service. Right, we always had the challenge of suicide. A lot of times in the early part of my career, that was handled through um, humor in some cases, a defense mechanism, I'm sure, right? Institutionally, even like, where's so and so today? He went to see the wizard, we would say, right? The wizard was a term for our mental health professionals back in then. Well, we tried to create a joke so it wouldn't show weakness, right? And then later on, we would say things like, if you need a little help, get a little help. And I liked that for a long time until I started asking the question, what if you need a lot of help? Right? Is it okay to get a lot of help? Because I think sometimes it was, well, it's okay to get a little help. If you need a lot of help, I'm not quite sure we can be there for you. I don't know if that was intentional, probably not, but it certainly sparked a question with me. So, um, and it's interesting because on active duty, when I was around Marines and sailors every day, I didn't struggle nearly enough, even when I was going through challenges. And not because I was trying to hide it and remain tough, but because the people around me, many of whom were going through similar challenges, we could almost recognize that in one another. And like you said before, Barry, it's okay to say, "Hey, I'm not feeling it right now," or maybe I'm a little down now. I think military men and women can communicate that to one another, um, non-verbally.
Mm.
Just by being there. I mean, how many times have you know, me and Scott and Barry, you in your service, and Rick in your service, in the police, how many times have you gone into a room with another service member and you recognize that something is going on? You don't say a word, you just sit there. You just stay there with them. Or you do something else. Let's go for a run. Let's go hit the gym. Let's do whatever. But I think it's just being there, right? So for me, when you think about transition, the struggle really ramped up when I left the Marine Corps, right? Because I wasn't around those men and women every day. And just that, and even today, if I'm honest today, when I'm feeling the most down, it's usually when I'm either physically alone or I'm emotionally alone, right? Emotionally alone because I don't have my brothers and sisters around me. And and I have two biological brothers. I'm not talking about them. I love them both dearly, but it really is, not having those service men and women around me. And what's crazy is they can be complete strangers. Like if I run into somebody who served in the Marine Corps and I spend 10 minutes with him or her and I'm in a down mood, just by being around them, I feel some level of resolution, right? Some level of respite. Because deep down inside, even if we didn't serve in the same place or the same time, there's fundamentally something we've both been through. We just inherently know it. And it doesn't have to be the same branch of service. I mean, I did time with the Army. I got the Ranger scroll behind me, right? So it's the same thing when I run into my Ranger brothers and mostly brothers, right, that are out there or other folks that I served with, just being around them. There's this intuitive sense. And we need that. Like even on this call, like I feel this sense of belonging with the folks that I can see on the screen right now. And having these opportunities to share and be vulnerable and know you're not going to be judged, but rather accepted, there's value in that, right?
Yeah,
Amen.
spot on.
And I think, Paul,
Yeah,
at,
go.
at this point, yeah, at this point, just looking at the clock, I want to transition, for lack of a better word, to the kind of the next topic. We've kind of bled into it, but um, I do want to bring up that the pyramid to show folks that will see this, recording wise. But I also want to give Paul an opportunity to maybe speak to a couple of the items that are on this. So just like Barry said, as you see this, I've got to move this out of my way so I can see it better here. You have faith at the top, wellness, and tribe at the bottom. And then you see those arrows coming into the center, these things that challenge us in our lives. And you just talk to the fact that, hey, when I'm alone, I feel alone. What's going on? Do I have a tribe? And a lot of times when people transition or when they leave service, right? Sometimes, like you said, they just want to get the hell away. Sorry for the language there, away from the service. You know what? Things didn't end the way I wanted to. I don't feel good about it, or I just want something different. Whatever it is. My experience has shown me that the people that I connect with the most are the people that I have an affinity for, and those are people that served. And just like you said, Paul, it doesn't have to be a Marine. It could be, a guy or gal from the Air Force, from the Army, from the Navy, the Coast Guard. That doesn't matter because they've walked on similar ground, and we probably have a lot in common. Our service for sure, but this how we live. What were our standards? What was important to us? We're similar. So I try to make sure that when I talk to folks who are about to leave, or maybe they've left and they're struggling, that you ask questions like, well, where are you with a sense of purpose? You know, your job might be outstanding, but there's that little hole there, right? Is there something that's not quite right? And so that's part of what this addresses, because look around that pyramid at the things that come in and start tugging on us, and that starts hitting our soul, right? So looking at this, is there anything that you see on there that you want to talk about here real quick? And let's do that. And then what I want to do, we'll spend a few minutes on this, but I also want to give us some time on the tail end of this to talk about ZeroMils, because I think that's an important part of what we're going to discuss, and that leads to your why as well.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's interesting. I think the two actually converge. Um, th this discussion and that discussion and why we founded ZeroMils. But I mean, you look around this triangle, you see so many things. Um, but purpose comes first in my mind because it's so synonymous, and at least for me, with service. Young men and women, and some of this maybe is a little bit Pollyanna-ish on my part, but I truly believe that most men and women who join the military join or at least stay because of this inherent sense and need really to serve, right? And certainly if you stay, it gets inculcated into who you are. Part of your identity as a service man or woman is that you're there to serve, right? The military services. And so purpose through continued service is something that I think a lot of veterans strive for, and I would say that most veterans need, right? As much as a human being needs to breathe air, right? Fresh oxygen or drink water. I think those of us in humanity that serve, and that's if not most of us. So this isn't just for the military. Like sometimes we talk about veterans as if it's its own class of citizen. And sometimes we put them up here on this pedestal, and neither of those things are true. I see so many um, intersections between our military veterans and veterans of other service institutions. Like I said, my mom was a nurse, right? And if you look at nursing and what they do, um, not only serving other people, but providing dignity, right? Which is inherent in who we are as human beings, right? Dignity is given to us by God. Nobody can take it away but Him, right? Our life is dignity. Well, people that serve as nurses and kind of that first responder, think of the work they do as very quote unquote undignified in some cases, but they do it, right? To ensure that that person they're serving doesn't lose that dignity. So I think it's inherent in us as human beings to want to serve, but you get so accustomed to it in the military, right? So when you get out, again, after 4 or 40 years, there's this inherent need to continue to serve because that service provides your purpose, right? I remember when I was at my low, I literally was in the corner of my room sobbing, asking my wife, like, what do I do now? What do I do now? Right. And what I meant was not a job, right? It was never about financial security or those kinds of concerns. But, by the grace of God, we didn't have those kinds of concerns really, particularly towards the tail end of my career. But what was I going to be? What was my identity going to be? How was I going to serve? What was my purpose going to be every day? And I think that in and of itself, right, this need for service combined with a connection through a tribe are the two biggest challenges we'll face as human beings, certainly as veterans, right? I think those two things alone. I'm no clinician, right? And I don't have the statistics to back it up, but I think those two things, loss of purpose, right, which can be found in service, and loss of connection, those are the two things that lead to despair, right? Loss of hope. If you can find purpose, right? And purpose is really through a calling from God, right? I think a lot of folks that serve in our military and other places, doctors, nurses, law enforcement, et cetera, teachers, um, are called to that level of service, called to that profession, right? And without having that, sometimes they lose their way.
Yeah, I would
Can
absolutely agree with that 100%. But
can I
so
order just a
since Barry is a clinician, yeah, go ahead, Barry. I want
Yeah.
you
I must tell
to,
you the last thing actually I identified. I don't like my breed very much anyway. So because we're too abstracted. It's like Shauna Springer talks about, are we technicians of the soul, the doctors, or we the docs?
Mm,
Docs don't call themselves clinicians. So
yeah,
just to
yeah.
qualify that one. But I want to just say one observation I've had in finishing is that whenever I strip with the folk I've sat with in my own journey, I strip away everything. You're right, loss of tribe, loss of family, loss of purpose. But when we take that away, at the bottom of it lies the grief. The thing that hit you when you were sitting in the corner.
Mm,
I believe and I experience that is the most difficult and challenging emotion to embrace. But in that ability to embrace, which we may need help or to open to it, grief is our greatest ally. I love acronyms. So, I saw grief as it teaches us gratitude, it teaches us respect, integrity, empathy, and faith. But embracing grief, whew, but until we embrace grief, how do we heal? How do we become fully present? And to come back to your core thing is part of that is the presence of faith in our life, the help we may get in the healing, and the ability to open up and bring the vulnerability not to our tribe because there's an instinctual being with each other that works. When I lost tribe, I became a marathon and ultra marathon runner, but I
mm,
could never run away from my grief. And even now at 72, when we're watching a film and my grief arises and my wife goes, "Are you okay?" And I go, "Yep." And I'm watching this and I'm going, "You really? Are you kidding?"
yeah,
So I just know that that one, that's the one. That's the elephant in the room that we don't like too much. So
yeah.
yeah, maybe a thought to leave with.
Yeah, I think we cover it up a lot. We try to cover it up with things that appear to be healthy, like running as an example, right? Or even, volunteering. Like, hey, I'm gonna get out and do something good, right? That'll make me feel better. I'll do something good. And there is some gratitude in that, but maybe the the rationale is wrong. Certainly, medication and some medication is needed and good. Some self-medication is not, right? And I know I've been there too. And what happens is if you don't, I think you need help dealing with it, right? You need somebody that to kind of guide you through it. And without it, you're left to your own devices. And sometimes those devices um, cloud your judgment in such a way that it just becomes irrational. Like I think about, having my own thoughts of suicide, and sorry about that. When you look back afterwards and you think, like, what was I thinking? Like now, in retrospect, it is so irrational. Like, what? What was I thinking? But at the moment, because you don't have the guidance. Maybe you've lost your ability to reflect on faith. Maybe you haven't lost your faith, but you lost this ability to reflect on it. You haven't embraced this thing, so now it's taken hold of you. And I remember one time sitting with a friend of mine um, who would just ask these very simple questions, like, I'm in this level of despair, and he's like, okay, okay, so what's the worst thing that can happen? And I'm arguing with him, like, well, it could be this. And he said, okay, well, what if that happens? And then I would think through it, like, and he would ask very like, so what if that happens? Is that going to impact, Beth and the kids? Is that going to change this? Is that going to change? And at the end of the day, most times the answer was no, right? It was all this perception in my mind of how things could have got, just snowballed out of control. And so he applied some rationality to it, right? He helped me work through it by just being very, very simple questions, right? But I think it takes that because it snaps you back from this level of um, irrational thought that you has taken a hold of you, right? You can't control it. So you need somebody to align it back in place, right? To put it back into harmony, to get what we would call ZeroMils, as a matter of fact. And I'll tell you about the name of our company and how it came to be. But it's that alignment, Barry. It's that, getting those things back in some level of equilibrium, right? Where you can focus on faith, you can focus on family, you can focus on tribe, you can focus on having, a purpose. You can even focus on being thankful and appreciative of all the gifts you've given, even these challenges, even this suffering, right? Because you can recognize that there is value there, right? And the value may not be for you. So stop being selfish, Paul. The value may not be for you. It may be for those around you. It may be for somebody after you who could learn from this, right? But once you recognize that, then you can snap out of it. And that's what happened to me. I finally snapped out of it. You saw me for a minute. I almost snapped back into it, but because it's there, it's there and it's real, and it probably never will go away. Like it's like
No.
people ask me about how to um how to cure PTSD. I'm like, good luck, right? I mean, you know, it's there, but you can learn to operate within it, right? And deal with it in a way. Embrace it. You can learn to embrace it in a way that you can find value.
Well, our grief is our greatest gift. It's what do we do when we're with veterans? The statement is, "I love you, brother." The declaration of love is also an acknowledgement that we understand each other's hearts.
Yeah.
And when we sit together in a circle, it's not the stories of our journey. We recognize in each other that incredibly powerful presence of grief that humanizes us and strengthens us. And when we can sit together with that, we truly heal.
Yeah. And I think we can share in one another's grief too. And
Spot
and
on.
and it's okay to do that. And sometimes you think it's not okay. Like um I remember one of the most honorable things that I was able to do as a Marine, but also a very hard thing to do, was bury other Marines, right? And ones that I didn't even know. Like there was time I was on a certain duty where that was an opportunity that was afforded me. That was an honor that was afforded me. And as a more senior Marine, I had several opportunities to present the colors to the surviving family, whether it's in most cases, a parent or a spouse. And I remember, you would say this line, on behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation, the Commonwealth Marine Corps, please accept, yada, yada, yada. And you would give this little canned remark. And I had a Sergeant Major at one time. I said, Sergeant Major, I can never get through it without tearing up, especially if I look into their eyes. And this guy, as the Marine Corps would say, was harder than woodpecker lips. Man, he was a hard Marine. And he said, "Hey, sir, it's okay. It's okay if you get emotional. When you look them in the eyes, it's okay that you're not a robot. It's okay if you get choked up. But don't stop, get through it, look them in the eye." So when I first would do it, I would literally walk over. There's a whole ceremony. You play taps, you salute, you get the flag. It's very ceremonial. It's beautiful. You take it, you maneuver over to the person, and you kind of bend down and deliver it to him and give the speech. He said, "Sir, that's not good enough." And he changed the way I did it to allow me to have that emotion and to share in their grief, Barry. And so what I would do is I would kneel down, I would give them the flag. I wouldn't remove my hands. I would take their hand and place mine on top of theirs. And then I would say, on behalf of the President of the United States and the Commandant of the Marine Corps and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a token of our appreciation for your loved ones' faithful and devoted service to our country and our Corps. So, but doing that, my goodness, I loved it and I hated it at the same time. But even if I didn't know the person, I shared in their grief. And I think there was value there. There was value for me, I know for sure. And I would guess because of how I was instructed by this great Marine who mentored me through this. There was value for the recipient too. So I know that's kind of a small example, but I think we can share in one another's grief, even more so if we know somebody, if they're struggling. I have a friend of mine, matter of fact, he's the guy who makes these shirts that I wear. He's a Marine veteran. He's quadriplegic. And there's times when I'm struggling, right? And I know he suffers every day, right, with this challenge that he's been given. But there's times he has so much empathy for me and whatever I'm going through, right? He's willing to share in my pain, even though his pain is much greater than mine. When you find people like that, you draw strength from them, and hopefully that they draw strength from you.
I think you've nailed it. And I want to thank you because I know we need to move on. But in that last part lies our healing and our hope and our transition forward.
Amen.
Yeah, so thank
Amen.
you, Paul. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Paul, I don't want to forget to say this, and I'll say it because I think it needs to be said. We've known each other for 33 years. When you do the math, and we weren't this. We were lieutenants, and then we were majors, and now we're retired. And I can say this is the best version of you. It absolutely is. What you're doing now and who you are. I've always respected you. I've always looked up to you, and then I had to when you became a colonel, right? But but I had no problem doing it. And who I see today, and listening to you, it makes my heart happy. It absolutely does because I'm so proud of you.
I
You're a
appreciate
good
that.
man. No,
I appreciate
absolutely.
that.
And what you're doing right now with ZeroMils, I think that's just testimony to who you and Kevin are. As you know, we interviewed Kevin last month,
Mhm.
and good interview. This is every bit as good as that. But I can see why you guys are such good friends. There's a lot of goodness in that relationship, and you're taking everything that you learned along the way, and the things that you work through, as we all do, those challenges. And now, I love to say this, when people do that, the ones that you really admire are the ones that turn around and they extend their hand out to pull those other folks forward, to help them get through these tough times. And that's exactly who you are and what you're doing. And the fact that you profess your faith, I think that's tremendous. I'm right there with you on that as well. So I just want to tell you, I'm so glad to be your friend, to be called a friend from you. So getting all that out of my system, let's go ahead and move on to ZeroMils. We want to hear a bit about that from your perspective. So share what you'd like to on what you're doing now
Sure,
as
sure.
president and co-founder at ZeroMils.
Yeah, so I cut my teeth after my military service, serving in the nonprofit space, and I enjoyed it. I had a great team, loved what we did. But at one point, it was kind of time to go, and just some challenges in the organization. So I decided to leave. And I really didn't. I was in that period again of like, okay, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? And I taught for a little while. I loved that. I was an adjunct professor at Catholic University for a little while, and that was awesome and a great experience. And eventually, I want to go back to that when time allows me to do it. But when we were in the nonprofit space, we learned some things, and I was taught some things by Kevin, who was had about a decade of that experience before I got there. And a lot of it was around providing value for our partners. We were able to grow that organization significantly in terms of impact, but also revenue, because we were providing value propositions to partners, namely corporations who funded the nonprofit. And we truly believe that we could help organizations do well, who in turn would help these nonprofits, these causes do more good, right? And all boats would rise together. And so we thought, well, we still want to have an impact in the community we care about. How can we do that? How can we help organizations and ourselves, frankly, do well, run a going concern as a business, but also while doing good? And that do well, do good came from two places. One, Kevin wrote about it back in, I think, 2011 in an op-ed. And I had read it more recently, 3 or 4 years ago when we founded ZeroMils. And that struck me, this do well, do good. And he was talking about, at that time, I believe, corporations doing well by doing good, by hiring veterans and military spouses, especially back in the 2010 to 2012, 13 time frame. People weren't hiring veterans like they are today. Really high unemployment in the veteran and military connected community. But we all know that veterans make great employees. So Kevin was trying to convince these companies, you can do well. You hire these people, they will work. They'll show up on time. They'll do great work, but you can also do good. And then when I went to Catholic U, and what drew me there was they had that same statement, do well, do good, in their business school. Because you had these students that were going through um, their academic studies, and they were trying to decide, well, do I go to, corporate America to do well, or do I do something more altruistic and do good? And the school said, well, you can do both if you do it right. So we thought about that as we were developing this organization, and but use the skills that we've developed, right? And this passion that we have and this need to continue to serve. And we struggled. Do we make this a nonprofit, or do we make it a for-profit entity? We chose for-profit because we didn't want to at least appear to be competing with the other nonprofits in the space. And we wanted to embrace a lot of these causes, like, have partners across the space. So we founded this organization to create what we call military thriving cultures and communities. And the thriving piece is really important because it denotes something more than just surviving. And it also kind of dispels this myth that veterans are broken, because we're not. Do we struggle? Absolutely, but so does everybody else. And veterans don't corner the market on anything. I mean, we don't corner the market on PTSD. We don't corner the market on trauma. We don't corner the market on grief. Other, human beings go through those same things. But we have a unique attribute, and that is back to my idea of service, right? So we thought, well, veterans can lead the way, right? Veterans can show that despite these challenges, they overcome them, right? And they triumph, right, in these areas. So we developed this concept called military thriving, which is more than just getting by, right? And we want to teach, I suppose, influence, inspire companies, probably more inspire than anything else, inspire companies to create cultures that recognize this. Now, for a long time, and even back to Kevin's days in the beginning in the nonprofit space, hiring veterans, it was about this idea of meaningful employment or just employment altogether, right? So when we came up with military thriving, we said it had to be more than that. That's important. During the transition, you have to find a job or a career. That's important, right, for your livelihood and everything else, and to provide purpose. But it's not the only thing. So we recognize meaningful employment is important. All those things I talked about before about inspiring others, contributing and providing value and feeling valued, and serving in an environment where there's mutual trust and respect, right? That's important. But so is a connected community, right? So is that tribe. You have to find it even in your business. And if you're a company and you create a tribe, this connected community inside your organization that seeps out into the environment around you, the community around you, well, that's good for business, but it's certainly good for your employees, right? They'll be part of something more, or they have the opportunity to go outside the gate or outside the wire, if you think about it from a military construct, and find purpose in the community as well through this connected community, but also continued service through purpose. I've talked about that a lot today. That's an inherent need. I think for most of us, certainly it's an Americanism, right? It's this American that even the founding of our country was founded by volunteers who stood up to fight against tyranny, right? Um, so volunteerism is important, but service is important. And then health and wellness. We talked about that quite a bit today too. And even the simple things when you're serving in the military, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of professions of arms, right? Police, firefighters, and whatnot. Even the medical community, there's a structured regiment on when you have to go to the doctor, right? Oh, it happened to Scott and I, like, hey, sir, come up and get your shots, hey, go to dental, all those things, right? Physical health from PT. Yeah, they tell you, right? Hey, Reveille, right? They sound the trumpet or the bugle, wake you up and make you run, right? And that continues throughout your career, right? Structured physical training. And then you have a little bit of an emotional background of health and wellness there too, because of your connected community, your family, your tribe, etc. Certainly spiritual health is there, right? In the military, we have chaplains and those kinds of things. Well, when you leave service, you can't just leave that stuff behind. And sometimes you're on your own to go figure it out, right? So what are organizations doing to guide the way, inspire folks to continue that, right? So if you have your health and wellness, that's important. So the first four things, as a reminder for those of you that are taking notes, meaningful employment, purpose through continued service, connected community, and health and wellness. And then the final thing is something we call a kit bag. And that's a term that a lot of folks that serve in the military will understand because we talk about it from day one. We talk about creating these toolkits, and a lot of the toolkits it's a metaphor for all these tricks and leadership traits and other things that you learn. You put them in this metaphorical toolkit that you can pull out later on to help yourself and those around you seek self-improvement, to grow and develop. And some of those tools are, education and mentoring programs. Some of those are leadership traits and principles that you can um, share with other folks. Some of it, like right now, this is a kit bag for me, right? I'm filling my kit bag by learning from you all and having these conversations, and hopefully others will as well, right? Take what we've shared here, things that you agree with, things that you want to challenge and maybe don't agree with, and you put those in your kit bag for later too to share with other folks, right? So those 5 things create military thriving. So that's the constructs we came up with. ZeroMils, the word itself, is a military term. A mil is a milradian. It's a unit of measure, much like a degree, right, on a compass. But a mil is much more finite. We use it in the artillery community. Snipers use it. Tankers use it to bore sight their weapons. And the intent is you get so accurate that when you fire a round, as an example, in the artillery, it will impact exactly where you want it to impact. And not only yours, but everybody else firing as well will have the same impact. So when you get to ZeroMils, you align your mission, your vision, your values with what drives the outcomes for your company or your organization, et cetera, right? So even your triangle there, right? There's this alignment piece. And if you're only a few mils out, there's 6,400, roughly 6,400 mils in a circle, right? So if you're just a few mils out, if you're only going 100 meters or so, then you won't be off very far. But if you express that out for miles and miles, you'll miss the target by a mile, right? So you can't afford to even be a few mils out. You have to get to ZeroMils, but that state of perfection only exists for a moment. And then something happens to knock things out of whack a little bit, right? In the artillery, we call it knocking it out of battery. So you constantly have to put things in motion to resolve that, right? So from a business standpoint, it's watching all the metrics, right, and aligning things. From a functional standpoint, as an individual, it's all those things that we talked about today, right? It is the purpose, it is the tribe, it is the family, it is your faith, all those things that if you don't find that harmony, pretty soon you're 1 mil out, 2 mils out, 3 mils out, and maybe that's okay because you'll be close to the target. But if you don't pay attention to it, if you don't tweak it a little bit, if you don't refine it, get your weapon system back online, and in my case, you stop reading scripture for a day or two, or you stop PT and running for a day or two. It's hard to miss the first day. You feel guilty. Oh, I got to get back to it. But after you miss 3, 4, 5 days, you you get a new routine and that goes away. Well, what happens? Now I'm 5 mils out, I'm 15 mils out, I'm 100 mils out. I'll never be on target now. I'll never have the impact I want to have in my own life, let alone for those who are relying on me. So we're constantly getting back to ZeroMils. And when you get there, it's almost a celebration. Like, are you at ZeroMils? Check, I'm at ZeroMils, right? You celebrate that moment. We used to do that in the artillery when we would lay our howitzers and get them all aligned. We would literally make this symbol, like, I'm at ZeroMils. Hey, great, we've achieved perfection. Give us a few minutes, we'll be out of battery again and we'll have to adjust, right? So life is like that too. We constantly go in and out of battery. How do we adjust to get back on track? So all those concepts came together. We figured out a way to make a company around it, and we're doing it, right? We've, Kevin and I started it. We brought in some other players. Now there's 5 of us internal to the organization, and then we have this incredible marketing team that really are part of our team as well. So yeah, it's been a fun 3.5 years. That's probably more than you wanted,
Yeah.
right, Scott?
No, I that was beautiful. I mean, that's the way that you phrased that. It really hones in exactly to what it is you guys are doing. As a Marine, you were singing the right song, but I think the way you did it is going to align with folks. They'll absolutely get that. So let me ask you this again, just for time. So is there anything you want to share with what you guys are doing now? Any events coming up that you want to let folks know
We
about?
we do. So one of the things that we have done a couple times this year, most recently in Dallas and Minneapolis, we're doing it again in Charlotte, and it's called Uniting in Service, right? And we think we can unite communities, frankly, unite our country by serving together. Again, it's an inherent need, and it's who we are as a people, I think, to serve. So we're going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina on November 6th. And we're doing a service project with an organization called Blessings in a Backpack that help children with food insecurity. And we're trying to bring veterans and the community together, along with youth, right, to pass down this idea of service and to demonstrate the value of veterans in their community. Again, we know we're not broken. Let's shift the narrative. Veterans are thriving and help others thrive, right? They can lead the way, but also veterans want to serve. So the week of Veterans Day, sometimes we get confused. We want to honor and celebrate veterans, but we don't necessarily need to serve veterans. As a matter of fact, I think we can even do better if we give veterans the opportunity to serve themselves. So we'll bring veterans together through company ERGs, but we'll bring the community together and pass down that legacy. I talked about legacy earlier, that legacy of service, right? Young people are excited to serve too. You see it in their faces when they come, and they can see and say, wow, that gentleman, that woman, they're here to serve too. Wonder how they got that, in the core of who they are. Oh, and then they share stories of service, and then maybe young people will say, "Hey, I want to serve too," and certainly would make my heart feel good if they decided they wanted to be Marines, right, and join the Marine Corps. But I would be almost as happy if they decided they wanted to join another branch of service, or maybe serve in a unique way as a firefighter or a police officer, or maybe as a healthcare professional, or maybe serving in another area that we wouldn't even think is a service industry per se, but is very important to our national security, something like the energy sector, infrastructure, all those things we need, great Americans to go serve in those ways too. So if young people kind of get the itch to service, then that will be inherent in them as well. So we're hoping to do all those things. So November 6th in Charlotte, we're going to demonstrate that. And then, we'll be involved in some of the other military things happening the rest of this year. Certainly the birthday ball. I'll be with my good friend Noah Courier in Chicago, I think the 8th, to celebrate with him. They do a ball every year to celebrate the founding of his organization that was founded on November 11th, 2011. But we also, because he's a Marine, I'm a Marine, there'll be a lot of Marines there. We'll celebrate the Marine Corps. And he comes from his community, his connected community are a lot of folks that struggle with severe, injuries or disabilities. but despite that, they are thriving, right? And so they demonstrate the value of that as well. So I'll do that on the 8th, and then um, yeah, and then we'll kind of close out the year, and then hopefully next year we're going to do some of these same things as well. You know, not to put a plug in, but to put a plug in. You know, zeromils.com is our website, and you can go there and click on events and see the things that are happening and the work that we're doing.
Outstanding. And, we're going to also, we'll put that once we are done recording and we get this out in the description part, we can place your website there. And if there's anything that you want us to add there, Paul, that's a place we can do it. So when folks are watching on YouTube and they, click on the description and go down, again, your link or whatever else you want to add in there, we can do that
Yeah,
to
perfect.
kind of help you guys a bit because I love your mission and what you said resonates so much. You know, as Americans, we're the melting pot, right? And there's a lot of different people that are here, but our core as Americans, everything you said is so foundational to make things work, right? And to make sure that our communities are thriving. Um, and the little ones, right? The kids, they have to see that, and the fact that you're wanting to bring them into this speaks volumes because we need to lay a accurate path for the next generation. They're smart. They're just as smart, if not smarter than we were or are. But our duty, our responsibility is to put light on the path and to help them. And you guys are doing that very well. So hats off to you and the crew. Thank you
Yeah,
for
we
what you're
appreciate
doing.
it.
Yeah. So with that, let's do this real quick. I'm gonna go to Barry real quick before we go to questions. You have a couple minutes for questions, Paul, if we have them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if you have questions, yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So what I want to do then, I want to go to Barry real quick because I'm sure he has a couple things that he might want to, talk about here, and then we'll shift gears and go to questions. What
I
you
mean,
got,
I
Barry?
don't. I think we've done a lot, but Paul, I want to just say how much I really value the strengths you bring, the vulnerabilities. You really represent that journey, and I wish my generation had seen something like this when we left our war. We would have been a lot better off and healthier off instead of blasting through so much of a mess which all of us trail behind us. So I just want to thank you for everything you brought today and the wisdom and the insight and just who you are as a human being. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation and the reception. It's been fantastic.
It's our pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, with that, for you guys that are watching live, does anyone have a question for Paul or anything you'd like to say? Sarah?
Okay, Paul, gosh, what a pleasure to hear you share. There's so many mic drops for me. Like somehow the way that you phrase something kind of hit me differently. Hearing, well over 1,000 stories of so many different branches. And by the way, happen to come from symphony musicians. Like that's how I was
Oh,
raised.
wow.
So I was thinking, you know what? Oh gosh, I even get that even more because there's so much that goes into this perfect performance. And my mom played in the Hollywood studios and Aspen Music Festival with like the best in the world. And you hear the concerts and it's perfection, but there's so much chaos in, having to have your phone right next to you for the gig that's coming in LA. It's just it can be kind of crazy. Um, and I guess as I was processing everything that you were sharing, also this huge appreciation for everything that goes into very, very high performance and having that harmony that you were talking about in the family and to be that young and to want to have, God, um, family and Marines. Um, but how often do you actually see that as a young person modeled, even though that's a wonderful ideal, And so I just kind of felt this deep appreciation for, wow, that is truly a challenge. And then, then after you're retired, looking back and on this platform, we always are kind of into like, what would we tell our younger self? Like, what would that look like? So I just, if this would probably need to be another whole talk, but it just made me feel like, how do you bring into a family that has that kind of laser focused mission that the Marines do? And how do you prep a family to be part of that so you don't have like these two different worlds? And I guess I just felt like, wow, I really appreciate that challenge. Like that is no small thing, to figure out. And so I guess I just appreciated a lot of what you said. Just even the fact too that Marines will break your heart. And I thought, if all the, over 1,000 stories we've heard on this platform, heard that, there would probably be less trauma in maybe organizational betrayal if they realized, yeah. So anyway, just, so many thoughts. So we might have to invite you on again, but thank you for listening and thank you for coming on. This was a great talk.
Oh, you're most welcome. I really appreciate the invite too.
Yeah, Sarah, I think that's a very smart comment about, it's kind of like expectation management, right? If you know at some point the Marine Corps is going to break your heart, doesn't mean it's not going to hurt, right? But at least if you understand that as you're moving forward, you know that that's going to be an eventuality. It's just like Paul saying, Paul, I remember that crystal clear when General Kulak, he was McCitic, right? And he would just show up at the basic school. Then everyone, all the leaders were like, because he always wanted to get time with the second lieutenants. So that the discussion Paul's talking about, he shows up, and then everyone's got to stop what they're. No matter what we were doing, you stopped and you had to go to the auditorium and sit there to listen to him. Folks are filing in, they sit down. Then he's like, I'm looking around. Some of you guys don't have your platoon commander's notebook. So I'm busy, but I'm going to give you a moment to run, go back and grab your notebook because what I'm about to say, you need to write this down. And that's exactly what Paul was speaking to. And I mean, when Paul was talking, that I just had a flashback. I felt like I was sitting back in that chair in the auditorium, making notes in my platoon commander's notebook. And that, yes, the Marine Corps will break your heart, whether you get injured, whether you decide to leave or whatever, it does come to an end. And I remember him saying, a lot of you guys might be fortunate enough to be a lieutenant colonel, and that's where it ends for you. That's where it ended for me, you know, and I'm happy with that. So anyhow, yeah, great point, Sarah. Thank you. Uh, Rich, what you got, brother?
And in our acronym DEA stood for two things: don't expect anything, and drunk every afternoon. But, but Paul, I really appreciate. I'm grateful to be on here today, and a lot of what you said resonated with me. You know, and I want to thank you for your service and your continued service to the community. Um, I, I mean, this was an exciting time for me, really, really. I'm glad that I was able to get on and meet you virtually. And um, yeah, thank you.
I appreciate that, Rich. Maybe I'll look for you the next time I'm at the museum. Maybe you'll be on duty that day.
Uh, but you mentioned General Krulak. Now, there were two Krulaks, right? One was in Vietnam, the I Corps.
Yeah, they both actually served in Vietnam. Krulak Senior, his father, was there as a little bit more of a senior Marine, and General Charles Krulak. The first one was Victor Krulak. Charles, or you can go by Chuck Krulak. The one Scott and I were talking about, I think served in Vietnam as a young lieutenant, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I was going to mention that to you both that next time Paul was up there, in the area, you guys could possibly meet up, but then you'll get to maybe share lunch or something. Who knows?
Yeah, that'd be great.
But
Fun tavern.
That's it.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, anyone else? Okay. Yeah, you're okay.
Hmm. I took a lot of notes. Lots of lots of beautiful things. I come to learn over and over for myself this even though this beautiful part of like this seeking of transition in life in general of like, bringing your kids to school before you go to the next part, like just how often we miss out on having any kind of conscious awareness of transitioning and what it would need or what we would want to bring or take back. And for me, I've found the word, I like the word translation. Everyone that I spoken with, all the, especially the special forces people, when I was like, how it never made sense for me how it worked in that very specific dynamic. Courage was there, power was there, and then you come home and you can translate nothing. Like the courage you had here doesn't even translate to have a conversation with your wife while
Mm.
you were enough courageous to give your life. There you are unable to have this very necessary conversation. Um, so and so I feel that very often the word translation for me is like this big part of like I can feel the care, right? The care is right there. It's like feelable, but it does not translate.
Mm.
There's no place. And when I hear you talk, I feel like there is this, maybe who knows when this starts. Maybe everyone who's even starting, who is ending up in the military, has like something why everybody ends up there, right? So, and I feel like the language that is spoken is the one that is so used to, and then you get out and you search for the same kind of language, right? I keep asking, I say like, why is there no interest to learn all the things of the emotional language or the things of the relational language? And I keep asking people, I say like, yeah, now you have like you're going to the through the third veterans event, and it's again sporting and I understand the brotherhood, but it's like, yeah, but I haven't done that sport. I say like, yeah, I get that you haven't done that sport, but
Yeah.
it's the same soup. It's the same skill that you already have in your body that you know what to do. You don't need to learn how to learn that kind of skill. And so I'm intrigued asking you of like when it came to the idea of guilt, I wrote down the word forgiveness because this is something
Mm.
I come across a lot when it comes to this insane amount of guilt and shame that comes with all kind of subjects, right? And I'm wondering if you've had in your family space, even with yourself, if you had a place, if there was a ritual for you, if you, I imagine, come across as a father, I imagine you do bit by bit, right? It kind of shifts. They're like, I guess, layer after layer after layer. Have you gone through something where you say, like, I needed to look at that, or I needed to have some kind of ritual for myself, or with my wife, or with my kids, or whatever you had when it came to releasing some of the guilt and to forgive, be forgiven or forgive yourself? If
I
there's even something that you would
Sure.
name like that.
Yeah, that is a huge topic. I think it compounds itself for a long, long time because you don't release it. Like you almost justify some of the things that you're guilty about, like not being there or um failing in your role. Now, I still I think I'm a pretty good dad. My kids turned out great, and we have a remarkable relationship. But I do remember moments of time when I literally would. I'd see him on Sunday afternoon. I wouldn't see him again until Saturday morning, right? Because I'd worked in, even when I was home, even if I wasn't deploying, because I would get home so late. And I do remember one time, kind of a funny story. By the time my kids were in high school, we would get texts, from their teachers. You'd see their grades. And my daughter got less than a stellar grade in a math class. So I get home and it's late, 9, 10 o'clock at night. She's already in bed. I go up to her room. I knock on the door, open the door, and I go, "Hey, what's up with that grade?" And she's like, "Oh, that's that class you've been promising to help me with the last couple of weeks." And I was like, "Okay, go back to sleep." Right. And you realize that I wasn't there. Right. So you take those things on. I even tell it now. I told it then as a joke, like, "Oh, look, I'm not going to be father of the year again." But that's how you deal with it. Right. You push it aside through humor. So I think, fortunately for me, like I'm blessed, right, with a bunch of gifts in my life. And one of the gifts that I've received was given to me just, I don't know, I said I don't believe in luck, but this is pretty close. I was born into a faithful Catholic family, right? So I grew up with the faith, and because I did, I had the strength of that faith. One of those things that's inherent in that particular faith, in my faith, is forgiveness, right? Recognizing that you can be forgiven, right? And um, and that's helpful. It's understanding and knowing that that is a fact, like that is truth to me. But that has been embedded in me my entire life. So when I recognize that that is in fact a truth, that I can be forgiven no matter what, then oh man, that's so I don't know what the word is. It's just so gracious, right? That we can be given that grace to be forgiven. So, and because you have that, um, then maybe you can pass it on, right? You're supposed to, right? If you think about the Lord's Prayer, right? And so um, that's the ritual. The ritual is understanding that that exists and it should exist for everyone. So there's even times when you will tell somebody that you love dearly, maybe a child, maybe a good friend, and you're honest with them, and you can say to them something like this: "What you're doing now, or what you're proposing to do, there's nothing you can say that will make me say that's okay." But there's also nothing you can do or say that would make me not love you the way I love you, right? It won't change because I will forgive you for those things, right? And it's not a get out of jail free card. It's not that. It's not a blank check to do wrong, but it's the fact that, love will prevail beyond that. Forgiveness will prevail beyond those things. So I never really had a ritual, but I think intuitively I knew that existed. So I knew, and by the grace of God, my kids have grown up with their faith and they're strong in their faith. Frankly, they're making me stronger in my faith. And I think having that knowledge, right? There's only a, 1 + 1 = 2. That's a truth, right? There's only a few of those. And the fact that you will be forgiven if you accept and ask for that forgiveness and you forgive others is remarkable. Like it lifts this incredible weight. So knowing that, I know it now more than ever, but even years ago, intuitively, I knew it. So that was always a relief and in some cases a release. That's kind of a long answer, but I don't know if that gets to the point of the question.
I'll take it.
Awesome. Well, Paul, something that came up listening to the question, and then of course the answer is, forgiving ourselves, right? A lot of times we struggle with forgiveness for ourselves. And, C.S. Lewis, paraphrasing here, he says, "Hey, if God can forgive us, then we should really be good with forgiving ourselves, because if not, then we're putting ourselves above God, right? Because he's the ultimate forgiver, right? So that when I read that, that was like, wow, because it's easy, that bad guy behind you keeps tapping you on the shoulder, telling you how much of a knucklehead you are, and then you start to believe it. But when you know that you are forgiven, God is the ultimate authority with that, and that opens the door for feeling okay. I can move forward. God's got my back. So good stuff. All right. Well, Paul, this has been an absolute pleasure. We are getting close to almost 2 hours. That's hard to believe, but
Wow.
I know
Wow.
we Ulrike is probably what, midnight there or a little after. What
I'm
time
so
is it
sorry,
there?
guys.
Oh no, she's in Germany, so. But yeah, it's late for her. But it is Friday. It's the weekend, and thank you again, Paul, for your time. Thank you, as was mentioned, for your service. Thank you for your continued service. You and Kevin are, as I mentioned, right? You guys are doing the Lord's work, literally and figuratively, and it's much needed. It is absolutely needed, and we're very thankful that you spent your Friday afternoon here with us today. Good seeing you, brother, and look forward to hopefully seeing you here, face to face at some point down the road.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me again. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thanks. Sometimes we all want to be listened to, so thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. That's how we learn, right? Yeah. So, hey, Paul, can you guys just hang on for a second after we
Sure.
stop the record?